So the introduction is more than adequate. All that means is that I'm old with a resume like that. But over those years, I've been richly blessed with opportunities. A lot of them here. Our kids were both born in Nebraska. Had a great tenure with the Nebraska Cattlemen. Traveled all over the state of Nebraska and really got to know and appreciate not only the people of the state, but just the rich natural resources that exist here. So it was fun to receive the invitation and to come back up and talk about something. You know, we'll get to the Farm Bill along with a few other things from a policy standpoint as well. But just to come and give a quick update here, and then happy to answer questions. That's a more meaningful discussion than me standing here droning on and going through some slides. So I've left a stack of my cards up here. If I didn't catch you, make sure you get one. Would love to interact with you in any way that we can. So let's see, maybe the arrows advance. There we go. Let's look a little bit at the legislative landscape. Before we dive into the Farm Bill, let's talk about some fun things, or maybe fun things. I don't know, at least they're more current. Last Friday, the 19th of January, Congress passed and President Biden signed the third continuing resolution related to our appropriations bills for the fiscal year that we're a third of the way through. That's not a win, by the way. It's just a place marker. It's an opportunity for the government to continue to run and for them to continue, Brad, to review the applications that are coming in for EQIP and CSP funds and all the other things that they do. So it's as I said, it's the third stopgap measure. It's because we're struggling to find agreement between the House and the Senate. Not necessarily a big surprise there, right? The House is Republican controlled, the Senate is Democrat controlled. But even within the House Republican caucus, there's a real challenge to get enough votes together to pass anything of substance. So probably the biggest takeaway from this is the longer it takes for the House and Senate to reach agreement and both within their party, within their body, and then across the bodies and get something on the president's desk, the longer it takes them to get an appropriations bill finished, the further back it's going to push the Farm Bill on the calendar. They've got to get the appropriations measure in place before they can do that. So that's one thing that's current, just happened a few days ago. The other one is this, a bit of good news. Last Friday as well, the House Ways and Means Committee passed H.R. 7024, really strong bipartisan vote, 40-3. We haven't had a 40-3 vote in forever, it feels like, in the House. To remind you, Nebraska's Adrian Smith is a senior member of the House Ways and Means Committee, chairs the International Trade Subcommittee on Ways and Means, and Adrian was a big part of drafting and passing this bill. A couple things that are interesting about this. The expensing limit for equipment and software. Anybody remember what that IRS tax code is? We were all singing it a few years ago. Section 179, everybody remember we talked about Section 179 deductions? Remember as well that it phased down over time. We were at 40%, anticipated I think for 2024. This would restore 179 deductions back at that 100% level on equipment, software purchases. A lot of purchases were made using the 179 deduction, right? That accelerated appreciation in the first year, the year of purchase, the year you put that asset to work, was the value. And it says 199 down below, sorry for that, it's 179, there's a typo there. What's interesting about this is that 40-3 vote has the attention of, not so hard in the House, the House will move it to the floor fairly soon. That's the attention of the Senate. And it's easy to understand why. It's an election year, right? There are elections, mid-year, or primary and general elections going to be conducted all over the country over the next several months. And so would anticipate that this will at least see some movement through Congress this year, and excited for that to be the case. We're going to fly through these next few slides pretty quickly. They're visuals for you. This is a map of what the House districts look like when you paint the Republican districts red and the Democratic districts blue. Republicans win the landmass, Democrats win the population centers. From the standpoint of leadership in the House Ag Committee, you hear a lot of conversation and references to Chairman G.T. Thompson, Pennsylvania, dairy farmer, awesome advocate for agriculture. The ranking member is David Scott from Georgia, has been a strong bipartisan advocate for farm policy for a number of years. Amy asked the question, what's the percentage of members on the House and Senate Ag Committee that have been on the committee and voted for a farm bill? This is my 6th farm bill, by the way, so I feel pretty good about that. Again, just means I'm old. But a shade over 30% of the 2 committee members total have ever been in the committee and voted for a farm bill. It's crazy how little member experience there is. When we talk to staff, that's why we're talking to staff. Because staff are the ones who have longevity, they're the ones that we have established relationships with, and that's frankly how the work gets done. Map of the U.S., looking at the Senate seats. Again, the Republicans in red, Democrats in blue. Striped state means they've got 1 member of each party. I should have gone to the bottom numbers. There's your breakdown of GOP, the Republicans and the Democrats. The 3 independents all caucus with the Democrats, so that gives them a 51-49 advantage. Here, 219, 213 with 3 vacancies. The Republicans will lose a portion of the 6-vote majority that they have there. That's not sure how many. They could lose 2. Doubtful they'll lose 3 as those vacancies are filled. So, the point is that it just narrows what's an already narrow, historically narrow margin. What we hear in D.C. 2 weeks ago?
1917?
Yeah, 1917 is the last time Congress has seen margins between the parties that are this narrow. So, on the Senate side, Senator Debbie Stabenow from Michigan, the chairwoman of the Senate Ag Committee. Senator Stabenow retires at the end of this year. This is a legacy opportunity for her. She may not admit it, but she does view this farm bill as a legacy opportunity for her to build on the legacy that she's had serving in the United States Senate. Senator John Boozman, we met with Senator Boozman while we were in D.C., very much an advocate for the type of policies that NSP and others are promoting. Strengthen the safety net for farmers, make sure that safety net is in place. You don't build a farm bill for the good times, you build a farm bill for the bad times. And we're heading into what are likely to be a couple of tough years where we see input prices remaining fairly high, commodity prices declining. As we jump into the farm bill, data that you've seen a million times, just presented a little bit differently, and I think this is really interesting. Let's see if I can get the pointer to work. Where's that at, by the way? Maybe there isn't one. Anyway, pie chart top left is all of the farm bill program. So that pie chart is all the spending in the farm bill. Pie chart bottom right is the total U.S. budget. Right, so different, you're going to see part of this one here. Let's start at the bottom left. I think it's right there. Okay. You'll see I'm going to do it over here. Probably walking off your camera. This piece right here is the farm bill portion. All of the farm bill spending as a portion of the federal budget. A whopping 2.4%. That's not a typo. So all of that circle is in those slices down here. All right? Now, take the slices, go up to the circle top left. Pac-Man, anybody in the room I think everybody in the room remembers Pac-Man. That's the nutrition program. That's SNAP. The lion's share, 81.1% of the farm bill spending is in food and nutrition programs. The safety net, crop insurance, commodity-related programs, are down here, a little over 11% of the total. Conservation's at 4%. The Inflation Reduction Act, Brad did a good job of putting some big numbers in front of you. $34.7 billion is the total Inflation Reduction Act cost, 2.3% of the budget, and then some smaller amounts as other titles in the Farm Bill out from there. So, get the picture, right? Big budget, small sliver for agriculture, and then as you take that small sliver, the pieces get smaller and smaller when you look at those elements that represent the farm safety net. This is a busy slide. This is a hard slide to wrap your head around. And I love it, but you have to take time to dissect this. So start first with the years represented on the axis at the bottom, okay? So get in your head the notion that this is from 1998 to 2033, okay? It's about 50 years, 45 years in there, 38, well, I got 38 years. That's the time frame represented on this slide. When you look at the bars for each year, you'll see how the farm safety net portion of the Farm Bill was spent in each of those years. Green is Title I. Title I is the commodity title of the Farm Bill. Blue is crop insurance. Red is called ad hoc. What's ad hoc mean? What's ad hoc spending? Here. It's the stuff that's not in the budget, and so you have a disaster program and it's spending that's added in because you had a disaster that particular year. So those are the three elements that make up each of those bars. You'll see significant change over time. Note that this is adjusted for inflation. So this number is probably lower than that in actual dollars spent in 1998 because it's been adjusted for inflation. The lines that go across are what would be called baseline. You have baseline discussed a lot in the Farm Bill. You'll see at the bottom of the graph, the gold line, 34.8 billion, is a 5-year baseline, looking backwards. That's 2023 and going 5 years back. Big, big dollars. Why? Why is that number so high?
Trade and disaster.
Ad hoc spending, absolutely. Does that? Yeah, the ad hoc numbers were huge. We had big ERP amounts that were absolutely necessary to address weather-related challenges in farm country. Blue line, so it's a 10-year look back from current. The blue line is 27 billion. It's because before those tough years, we had some pretty good years. So the total baseline spending over that 10-year period was quite a bit lower than it was over 5. The brown line, the one that goes from 2023 all the way back to the beginning of the chart, is a 25-year baseline. That number's 28.7. Theory, it would fall in between those numbers, and that's where it falls. Okay, so everything that we've talked about in baseline is historical. This is stuff that's already happened. What you're going to hear talked about in the debate now is the current baseline. What's the baseline for the Farm Bill? What's the baseline that the House and Senate Ag Committees have to allocate as spending among federal programs when they get ready to pass a Farm Bill? And the current baseline is $16.9 billion. Because there's no ad hoc in there, right? Farm safety net, so Title I, crop insurance, conservation. The IRA funds are not in the baseline. The $34.7 billion today is CCC funds, and they do not sit in the baseline today, although the dollars are being delivered to farmers today and every day for the next 5 years. Questions about this? This is hard. This is a piece of farm policy. The budget side of farm policy is harder than the policy side of farm policy to me. But it's such a critical piece because in theory, the 10-year spending limit for the Farm Bill that is yet to be written is $16.9 billion, right? unless something changes, unless programs are added to the Farm Bill and it increases baseline. All right, we'll come, if questions, just holler.
Question of those ad hoc dollars, are they a part of the budget, or did those dollars come from someplace else?
Yeah.
Where they're used?
So they are not budgeted in the sense of a budget being passed by Congress before an appropriations measure or an emergency spending provision is.
Yeah, so they really weren't in the Farm Bill, but so when we look back,
So
those were not dollars that we
Yeah.
planned on.
how do we,
They showed up.
all right, so the follow-up question you didn't ask is how do we pay for it?
Well.
Debt or tax increase, right? You either add to debt or you have a tax increase to offset, one or the other.
Yeah, increase the dollar.
So funding challenges, that's why we spent so much time on that graph is you gotta look at the funding challenges. Farm Bureau's convention is going on this week. Really one of the bellwether January national meetings that happens. It's where a lot of the ag policy items and discussion come out at Farm Bureau. You know, huge crowd. They bring in a lot of folks, and a lot of the politicians will be there. Chief of Staff for the House Ag Committee, Parrish Braden, highlighted the need for 70 to 100 billion above the current baseline. Okay, so there's where G.T. Thompson's perspective is, 70 to 100 billion over a baseline of 16.9, right? They're proposed to move dollars from the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, both in the areas around conservation and climate. So that 34.7 billion that was outlined in the pie chart, as well as a $30 billion shift in SNAP around the Thrifty Food Plan. So without going into the details, there's a I'm going to call it a glitch. Probably would have folks mad at me if I did. They're not going to be able to spend the Food Nutrition Services Division. It's not going to be able to spend all the dollars that have been appropriated, and so there was a $30 billion element of that could be considered a savings and brought back to the baseline for the next farm. That's the provision. Senator Bozeman would share similar perspectives on both of those provisions. We discussed both of them when we went with Senator Bozeman's staff in DC 2 weeks ago. We'll get to that in the next slide. This is an important last little bullet at the end. Brad's shaking his head because he gets it too. Those dollars in the Inflation Reduction Act, he talked about the big ramp up in dollars in Nebraska. That's all over the country. They have to be spent by 2031 or they go away. There's not a provision to save those for a rainy day, if you will. So who raised the issue about the county offices being overwhelmed? They're fixing to be overwhelmed because those dollars ramp up so quickly, and there's a clock, which is why the Republicans say, bring it into the baseline, smooth that spending out over the next 10 years, and make sure that we are able to utilize all those dollars for on-the-ground changes in ag conservation practices. The other side, the Democrats. So majority party in the Senate, minority party in the House. They've redlined two things. They've redlined any changes to that Thrifty Food Plan update, and they have redlined the IRA funding. They've said no, a line that they aren't willing to cross at this stage. Chairwoman Stabenow has reportedly mentioned an additional $5 to $7 billion. Okay, so just as a reminder, Chairman Thompson in the House said 70 to 100 billion additional dollars. Chairwoman Stabenow in the Senate says 5 to 7 billion of additional dollars. They've not yet said where it comes from. We've got a few ideas. Amy's grinning up here right now. They were pitching some changes in crop insurance that were head scratchers. There was no details around it when we met with them. And we struggled to figure out how that could even represent the $5 to $7 billion in savings. The Secretary of Ag propose using CCC funds. We'll see how that plays out. Certainly there was some use in trade programs that have been announced just in the last 60 days or so. This is a little bit repetitive, so I'll kind of speed through, but you know, Chairwoman Stabenow sent out a dear colleague letter about 10 days ago. It was after we were in DC and before being here. And you can read there for yourself kind of her lines in the sand, things that she thinks are important. And that's about as detailed as the presentation was to us face to face. It was short on details, to say the very least. The crop insurance piece is one, and y'all are gonna ask questions and we're gonna have to say, we don't get it either, is a shift from ARC or PLC to area-wide coverage, but the provision, what they drove home over and over again, is if you took that area-wide coverage, you did not have an option for ARC or PLC. And for us, we're still scratching our head trying to figure out how that works to the benefit of growers. And we're not saying it doesn't, we're just saying we've got to see some details to understand that better. The subject around increases in reference pricing, we'll talk about this in more detail, fell just flat with the majority staff. The interest in having a reasonable market-related increase in reference pricing was something that there was just no interest in. On the Republican side of the Senate Ag Committee, really two perspectives here that line up fairly well, but it's the who on these that really matters. Senator Hope from North Dakota. Now, read his titles. He's a senior member of the Ag Committee, but more importantly, he's a ranking Republican member of the Ag Appropriations Subcommittee. He has come out boldly and broadly and said we've got to make updates to reference prices to reflect the reality of production costs. Ranking Member Bozeman obviously has a more, his deal is more farm in the Farm Bill. We've got to make meaningful investments to reflect the needs of modern agriculture. So there's obviously a pretty distinct difference between the House and Senate staff and the leadership of the Senate Ag Committee. You go to the House side. This will appear that there's some difference there. Those parties are closer together. GT wants to increase in the safety net, so that's reference prices as a priority part of that. The first opportunity that he was very explicit with us in the meeting, the first opportunity that he sees to move a bill through committee into the floor of the House is in March of this year. It's the first time that there's 3 consecutive weeks that the House is in session and they can pass a bill. Again, as we said earlier, appropriations will likely have an impact on that. Ranking Member David Scott, has come out a little more boldly on keeping the IRA dollars out of the Farm Bill baseline. Not nearly as explicit as we've seen on the Senate side, but certainly has drawn a bit of a bright line there from his standpoint. I think I would view the House Ag Committee as we met with both the majority and minority staff. There's more eagerness to work in a bipartisan fashion there. The challenge in the House is the Republican caucus, is getting the Republican members all on the same page. For the House to pass the CR last Friday, there were, anybody remember the number? 40-some Republicans who voted against the continuing resolution put up by the Republican Speaker of the House. Overwhelmingly passed, but it overwhelmingly passed because the Democrats joined the majority of the Republicans, but not all of them. A few kind of high-level points. We've talked about some of this. The key driver is really addressing increased production costs, making sure the safety nets works in a meaningful way. Challenges of divided government, narrow margin in the Senate, but a divided Republican caucus in the House. This farm bill is going to require a level of creativity that we probably haven't seen in the past. The focus needs to be on long-term investments. Ad hoc spending is not a long-term investment in ag policy. A stronger safety net that's in place to protect against the bad times is the sort of policy that's absolutely necessary. Then I really like this last line. I'm not sure where Sydney grabbed this from, but I really thought it was good. Harnessing the power of a positive, pragmatic, and generally bipartisan ag community. You know, we sit down in a meeting of farmers, nobody's going, hey, you Republican or Democrat? Nobody's drawing those sort of lines per se. We're talking about good public policy and how we get it done. And I think Washington could take a page or two out of the playbook from a farmer meeting and put it into practice. Let's talk a little bit about price selection and cost of production. Y'all are familiar with how price selection is set. For sorghum, it's a function of the crop insurance price for corn. It's a mathematical process. It is not necessarily based strictly on sorghum prices. It backs into it from sorghum prices, but when you've got a 90 million acre crop and a 7 million acre crop, you use that 90 million acre crop to help kind of create some stability in price selection. For 2024, for the first time in history, price selection for sorghum is higher than the price selection for corn. 100.2%. It's probably still too low, given sorghum prices relative to corn prices, especially in 2022, 2023. It's the highest level ever. Amy made mention of NASS, the National Ag Statistics Service. We'll talk about them a little bit and some of the discrepancies that we found in their price reporting data. Effective reference price for RPLC for sorghum for 2024 is 406. That's a frighteningly low number relative to where sorghum prices have been the last couple of years. Cost of production, we're seeing some decreases over the last couple of years, some adjustments in herbicide and fertilizer prices. Anticipate slightly lower crop insurance prices. I might have heard some different numbers floating around in the room here. Anybody seen anything that suggests differently than that on crop insurance prices? We anticipate lower just because commodity prices are lower, unless y'all are hearing anything different. But equipment costs are still high. Labor is still a challenge, and because it's a challenge, it's high. Land prices have not backed up, whether it's rent or purchase. So, the concern is without an adjustment, a market-based adjustment in reference prices, the margins just get more slim. Trade policy, talked about this a little bit earlier. Verity Ulibarri, who you may or may not know of, sorghum producer in New Mexico, actively been involved with NSP and the checkoff over the years. She is the vice chairwoman of the U.S. Grains Council. It's a big dang deal to have a sorghum producer in a vice chair and then ultimately into the chairman position or chairwoman position for the U.S. Grains Council. This is a big deal. And she's awesome. I hope you get a chance to meet her sometime. She's just phenomenal person. In November, mentioned earlier, there were some funds from CCC that have come into trade promotion. There's a RAP program, Regional Ag Promotion Program. We're actually working a grant application right now through the checkoff, primarily on using that RAP program to help enhance export opportunities. But more importantly, domestic programs, school lunch, we see as a neat domestic opportunity for sorghum and one that we want to continue to build on. Some additional funding through MAP and FM and foreign market development programs at USDA. Senator Marshall in Kansas introduced last June Farmers Feed the World Act just to help prioritize American commodities in foreign food aid. I would tell you this, between the time we came back from lunch and when I'm up here now, Tim and I have been in Jamaica's been part of it as well, in an email conversation back and forth. Anheuser-Busch, y'all ever heard of them? A little company here in the U.S. Actually probably owned internationally, but they are looking at a program, putting a program in place to enhance or encourage the purchase of U.S. grown grains, because they use quite a bit of grains in the products that they produce, over those that would be sourced from other countries. So, got to work through the details of it. They want to have a conversation at Commodity Classic. They're going to be visible at Commodity Classic, and they want to have a conversation between now and then and there as well, in terms of advancing domestic sourced grain versus what would be imported. Little recap quickly: sorghum silage, big deal in my part of the world and southwestern and western Kansas. A lot of sorghum acres shifted to silage production. One of the changes that occurred in 23 for implementation in 24 affected Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico. We're working with the RMA office in Topeka to make the same change for Kansas, Colorado, and Nebraska for 2025. But essentially, on non-irrigated acres, the historical production requirements, you had to have 3 years, and y'all help me if I get it wrong, 3 years of historical production of silage in place before you could qualify for crop insurance coverage on your silage crop. And so that restriction, or that requirement, I should say, has been removed. Very, very well received in the South, where we're seeing, we got a cheese plant coming into Dodge City where I live. Big milk plant came into Garden City just a few years ago. Number of dairy cows that are coming to our part of the world is alarming. It's huge. In addition to the cattle and feed that are already in place, and so the rightful position for sorghum silage in that space is something we got to continue to prop up and make sure that there are policies in place that prevent that growth. Price selection, talked about this a little bit ago, but here's sort of how the numbers come together. And Amy mentioned a call that we had yesterday with NAS, the National Ag Statistics Survey. The chart's important, okay? The numbers in the chart are really important. So work your way from left to right. Understand that this is June, July, and August of 2023. The number on the box is the original price that NAS reported as being paid for sorghum in all the states and all the first purchasers that they surveyed. And they called and the number was $5.48 per bushel. We knew that number wasn't right. And so we appealed to NAS. The July number was even greater. 415 revised up to 505. We had numbers that were over $6 in July. The August number, their revised number gets closer, but we're still seeing significant variance between the prices that are paid, and y'all understand how those prices are collected. The checkoff collects those as part of collecting the checkoff payment on sorghum from first purchasers. And it's a function of the price paid. It's not 2 pennies per bushel. It's a function of the price that's paid for sorghum. So it's a market-based support for the sorghum checkoff. So we've got the data as an industry. We just can't use it for this purpose. So we had a private call with NAS yesterday, and we had the chairman of that division. We had his top members of his leadership team. They were a bit astounded at the divergence that existed from their revised numbers and the industry's numbers. Made a commitment to us to meet regularly and to get it resolved. We talked about some areas that they may not be aware of, like the fact that in Texas, probably a third of the Texas sorghum crop, especially that's grown in the Gulf, is harvested midsummer, goes on a truck, goes to the coast, goes on a barge, and leaves our waters. And so the question was, are you getting those numbers, those direct ship numbers from Cargill and ADM, who have port facilities at Corpus Christi and Houston? And they weren't sure. We're going to check into it. They were honest. They shot dead straight with us yesterday. Couldn't have asked for the call to go better. I think Amy would share.
Yeah, out of all the groups, agencies that we work with, it was almost eerie because they were so eager to work together. And you don't see that very often. So maybe they're blowing smoke. I felt like it was pretty legit, and we're gonna keep our fingers crossed that
That's
it
right.
was.
Here's a graph of how those numbers have tracked over time. So you go back to 2012 up to the current. The red is the price to farmer number that we collect. Blue is the WASD number, the World Ag Supply and Demand number. That's essentially what's reported for sorghum. They track well, you know. I mean, you're going to get a lag sometimes in there until you get to 2022, and the divergence coming into 2022 through 2023 is significant. And so there's some work to do there. Climate Smart Grant, Brad did a great job earlier of walking you through that. It is such a tremendous opportunity, and really, now this is Greg's point of view, all right? It's a wonderful opportunity for the sorghum industry to fill gaps in data, farm level data, that we can't fill any other way. Okay? We're fortunate that the checkoff gives us the chance to pull that producer data, the producer price paid to producer data together that we just showed you on NAS. But what about production data? What about water savings? What about fertilizer savings? What about the efficiency that you get with a sorghum crop that you don't necessarily get with a corn crop? We've got to capture that data. We've got a story to write and to tell. And the Climate Smart Grant really is our first opportunity to begin gathering the data and writing the story. When we talk about the subsidiaries, the work Brad's doing today through Prairie Resource Partners on matching up growers to those USDA conservation dollars, the opportunities that come with Harvest Horizons, like the Anheuser-Busch email that came today, all those pieces line up perfectly to help position sorghum in a way that we can really ramp up and chase acres back into this crop. Now back to a little reality. So ERP, emergency program from 2020 and 2021, pretty effectively managed in those 2 years. There was $8.3 billion of ad hoc. This is the ad hoc. This is those big red numbers in 2020 and 2021 you saw on that graph. Okay, this is it. So in those 2 years, there was $8.3 billion dispersed under ERP ad hoc disaster spending. Program worked fairly well. Worked as it should. 2022 has been a whole different story. I don't think we can overstate how poorly the 2022 program has been administered by USDA. It's just that simple. There are attributes that were brought into the distribution of those funds, limited number of dollars, and a much larger disaster. So the demand for those dollars was high. USDA took it upon themselves to create a little different set of tests to use for the distribution of the funds, and it created winners and losers, to say the least. Anybody in the room did you get your, I'm trying to think what they call the first one that came, that first form that came out? It's kind of pre-filled out. Track one, thank you, Brad. Get a track one form pre-filled out from your local office, from FSA. Let me say this. They're a mess. Right now, there are bills in Congress USDA has suspended the program. So first off, know that you're not missing out on something. USDA has suspended the program, the 2022 disaster program. They're gonna have to rewrite their formula. that they took upon themselves to rewrite. Congress is very disappointed that they took the clear congressional intent that had been established in previous farm bills to allocate ad hoc disaster monies and turn it on its head. And so know that that program is under revision, and we'll keep you up to speed on when it rolls back. I haven't heard much for about 45 days. It was all the rage in last half of November, first half of December, and then it's gone kind of quiet. So a lot of work to do there around those funds. You know, at the end of the day, it's a smaller dollar amount, at least that the Congress had appropriated at that point in time, and we know the size of the disaster in 2023. You felt it here, just as we felt it in southwest Kansas and down to the Texas. So, you know, what do we do now for 2023? So 2022 was the ERP nightmare. Now we've got a 2023 disaster on our hands as well. How do we find more money for the farmer? Is it 5 to 7 billion? Is it 70 to 100 billion? And where, you know, that's not sitting under the couch cushions anywhere. That's real cuts to other programs. What about the elections? What about legal challenges? That ERP 2022 program has been, there have been suits filed around how that's been administered. And then, oh yeah, in November, we're gonna all come together and hold a presidential election. And we know how much of impact there is upstream when an election is held. So with that, I want to make sure and leave some time for questions or discussion. Always happy to chat about this stuff. I'm a policy nerd and have been for a really long time, and this is fun stuff to work on right now. So questions, comments,